Studio is political analyst Dean Tony La Viña. Dean, Tony, thank you very much for being with us. Before we begin, I just want to ask you what it was like for you when you voted today.
I actually voted with media
Okay.
absentee because I had a lot of media calls today.
All
And
right.
I remember last time it took us 3 hours to vote, so and I couldn't do the morning calls, right? So 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, okay.
Like most
Sige.
of you.
Okay, sabay-sabay pala tayo.
But I
Maybe you...
followed my family, and then the family.
You went with them today also?
No, I didn't have to go because I was doing media calls in
Okay,
the
okay.
house. But they were updating me of what was happening, and all three in my family were able to vote. My wife, this is the first time we would have voted as seniors, so she did it in 15 minutes. The two sons in their 20s and early 30s, they finished in a couple of hours before lunch.
Yeah. And of course, since we did local absentee voting and not very many people know, this is manual, right? It was
Yes,
manual
yes.
for us and we couldn't vote for local candidates.
Yes,
So medyo
yes.
nanghinayan ka doon or okay na rin?
Yes, because I have a candidate in Quezon City, but she'll probably win anyway. So
Yeah, okay. Well, we were showing the live pictures from PPCRV's command center in UST earlier. And I want to ask you first, no, because of course a lot of people look to non-government organizations, partners of COMELEC, to kumbaga, verify and to, to tell us that huwag kayong mag-alala, maayos ang lahat. We went through the numbers, no. So what is your feeling about this election in terms of yung pagtanggap ng resulta, knowing that we have PPCRV that is going to do that count and that they have 2 copies of the election returns to compare. We have NAMFREL that is also on guard na magbabantay at gagawa ng isang random manual audit.
the results should be acceptable if, in fact, there are no major glitches, no, in the next 48 hours. If it's a landslide, that's one scenario in favor of one candidate. I think the other candidates will really have no choice but to accept that. The real problem, which is what happened in 2016, is when you have a close fight, and that's the other scenario. The other scenario is there might be a close fight between the top 2 candidates.
You refer to BBM and Lenny.
Marcos
Okay.
and Robredo. That's a less likely scenario, in my view. Being a scientist also, I think the more likely scenario is a landslide given the polls. But the polls was 3 weeks ago. That was the last polling. So there's quite...
But there is the latest April. Yung,
April 21,
late
that's 3
April.
weeks ago,
And
from the
there
elections.
there
April
is word
25
about there is word
is
about
up,
a Lilo survey in the first week of May
Yeah.
showing practically the same numbers.
Yes, exactly, and it's been consistent, right? So, but I just look at as the gold standard Pulse Asia and
SW.
Octa Research.
Octa, yes.
Yeah. No comment on the other polls. It's just that I just it's good to kind of have some gold standard for us as academics. But having said that, that was a few weeks ago, and a day is an eternity in politics. So
Yes.
there's always this possibility of something that we have not been able to catch through the survey. So that's why there's a less likely but plausible scenario of a Lenny victory or a very close fight between the two. In which case, if it's within a 1 million margin, then everything becomes more important. Transparency becomes more important. We did prove in 2016 in the VP race, right? That was 200,000 votes. That at the end of the road, after 6 years, though, it was proven that there was no cheating. That in fact VP Lenny won, fair and square, even with the machines. I personally think the system that we have while supporting automated voting is also very untransparent. I mean, basically you have to trust the COMELEC, you have to trust PPCRV, you have to trust
NAMFREL.
you have to trust certain institutions with kind of blind faith, right? I mean, while in the past, I favor the mixed system where the counting at the
precinct is
at
manual.
The precinct level is manual.
Oh, you would rather that?
Yes, the transmissions.
Really? Pero dun nga nagkakagulo minsan.
No, ang gulo. No, I'm a lawyer. Pia, ang gulo was never. Marcos, yes. Kasi may goons, di ba? At guns. But after Marcos, never sa precinct level, ang gulo sa transmission. In the canvassing. Because the transportation of the ballot box, the acceptance of the certificates of canvass all the way.
But right now,
that's the problem.
But right now, the AAS allows us, for example, well, not me, manual kasi tayo, but voters today got a recibo, a receipt, the VVPAT, no? And they can see it. It is shown to them, and then they put it in the receptacle. For you, that is not enough.
Well, that's just a receipt of your vote, right? But that's not a receipt of the votes that was counted in your. But there's nothing, as I said, I followed the Robredo Marcos protest, and what we see is the technology actually works. So
let's go. Okay,
it's the transparency of the technology.
Okay, well, let's go back, sir.
That's a challenge in my view.
Yeah, let's go back, sir, to your earlier point about what scenario, two scenarios that we will have late tonight or early tomorrow morning, where you have a landslide victory by, and I'm presupposing that you are referring to BBM, or a victory within a 1 million margin of by Leni Robredo.
Or Marcos too, but it's a close fight.
Or Marcos, But given the surveys, and you said earlier, no, you look at numbers, you look at data. So the surveys that you say are your gold standard are all saying the same thing, that this is like a 30-point spread between number one and number two.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's most likely. But it's not impossible.
Yeah.
Because elections are, as I said, 1 day is an eternity in politics, and 3 days an eternity, and even 1 day is an eternity, 2 days is a double eternity, 1 week is 7 days of eternity. So,
so, sir, if 1 day is an eternity, and then let's say from late April when the last survey was released to May 9, so that's about 9, 10, 11, 12 days. So maraming days of eternity yan. What were if there was going to be a miracle, ano yung mga signs,
it's the house-to-house campaign.
House-to-house.
And it's the rallies, because that's the one that really, I look at 4 data points. I just don't look at surveys when I predict results and look at campaigns, because otherwise then you don't even have to vote, you just look at surveys. I look at surveys, I look at social media and traditional media, I look at political endorsements, and I look at rallies and engagement and passion of supporters. So surveys, definitely Marcos. Political endorsements, Marcos, but Robredo very close behind with quality endorsements, especially in Mindanao. Social media, finally Robredo caught up in the last couple of weeks. But rallies and passion of supporters, definitely Robredo. And that's why but because certainly from predictability point of view, surveys are, have been more reliable than I'm going to say that more likely than not that this is going to be a landslide in favor of Marcos. So we'll be surprised. In other words, in the first few hours, if in fact they come tonight, because the first few hours are going to be from the major population centers, right? Metro Manila, Central Luzon, Southern Tagalog, Cebu, Pangasinan, Cavite. These are the big population centers. If Marcos does not have a landslide there, and landslide means 5-10 million lead like that, but only like has a 1 million lead there, then that means the surveys are off. And then we won't know tomorrow, it will have 2 or 3 days, because Mindanao becomes the most decisive. And that's why the Robredo campaign actually focused on Mindanao in its last 2 weeks and got really good quality endorsements.
Tony, we're going to be taking a very quick break. We'll be back. CNN Philippines, your most trusted destination for live, up-to-the-minute, and in-depth coverage of today's historic vote. Be right back. As we wait for vote results, political analyst Dean Tony La Viña. Dean Tony, so, the anticipation is in the air. We're just waiting for the first numbers. As a matter of fact, I remember every time yung unang batch pumapasok, nagpapalakpakan, it's a cause for jubilation. No?
This is my as a voter, I think
Pang-ilan
my
na?
16th or 17th. Kasi from 78, I voted na. IBP
Yeah.
elections.
Oo.
Marcos
So,
era
naglaban
yun.
kayo? Laban? You-
Cagayan de Oro, so Mindanao Alliance, opposition.
okay.
We won there in the city of Cagayan de Oro. The opposition won against the Marcos candidates. And then, but even before that, 1960s pa, umuupo ko sa grandfather, with my grandfather, with a pen and also for radio to listen to the results. I
Yes.
actually love to listen to the first returns and
Yes.
and as it grows and it grows, diba? So I'm hopeful kasi in 2019 I was actually in another studio for 4 hours waiting for
Yeah.
for the results. Well, what I do,
Nobody can forget that night.
In technology, Murphy's Law always applies. Something always goes wrong. It's not. What you hope lang is that they have solutions to what goes wrong. But that is for sure with a massive exercise like this, right? And I wanted to correct the VCMs because from what we gather from Contradaya, for example, this is the biggest number of VCMs that have had problems. That over 2,000, they say, that have been reported to them. So very different number from PPCRV. So
Well, yeah,
that's
we
a
will
million
get-
votes.
we will get an
if it's a
update from
close
Comelec.
election, a million votes matter. Remember again the margin between VP Lenny and BBM in 2016 was 200,000 votes. So you really don't want disenfranchisement that's happened. And right now there's still precincts that are not able to close because there's so many people that are in the precinct that has not been able to vote yet. I mean, that's why there's been also a call for extension of voting, at least in those areas where people have not been able to vote.
Okay. Sometimes when we prepare for elections, we look at all those other numbers like voter turnout, for example, or how much percentage of the vote the winning candidate, and in this case, President got. No, but among the all this data, what I wanted to ask you about now muna is yung turnout. Para bang palaki ng palaki siya. 75%, 92, 98, 78%. And in spite of the pandemic, it seemed like, judging from what the video that we saw today, to this morning and this afternoon, ang daming.
I think historic
so many
ito.
people went to
This
the
will probably
centers.
the biggest turnout natin was, di ba, ERAP 1998, 86%, because the poor really felt empowered by that they will vote for someone that they wanted. So I think something similar is going to happen with this, and particularly first-time voters. I mean, quite a lot of first-time voters registered and are voting for the first time.
Okay, yeah, and first-time voters
So I
and
suspect
yeah,
baka
big.
umabot tayo. We never really reached 90%. But that is already very high. 80% in any democracy is super high already.
Yeah.
We've always been able to do 75, 80%. But I suspect we'll hit near 90 this time. I actually don't know anyone who
Who did not vote?
did not vote, who did not want to vote or choose not to vote. I mean,
Yeah.
in the past, I've always known people. I know people who haven't voted for many years. I saw one who hasn't voted since 86.
Really? Because? Bakit daw?
I don't know. Maybe didn't find it that consequential, but this is a consequential election. Everyone agrees. So,
Yeah.
so that's why the turnout is this much.
Yeah, well, speaking of first-time voters, and I think we have that graphic available somewhere, the 18 to 25 age bracket is 13.1 million, 26 to 41 age bracket, millennials 23.9. Laki. Ang laki ng bilang na ito, ng numerong ito. In the last few days, Comelec announced that there will be a decision by the NBank tomorrow, a final decision on the disqualification cases in DQ.
And that means that there will be a Supreme Court case the next day or the day after. So if in fact Marcos is leading and by a landslide in the unofficial count and starts leading in the official count, that usually takes 5 to 10 days before proclamation, there will be a Supreme Court case pending. So there'll be a debate in Congress. Should we proceed to proclaim him while that case is pending? will the Supreme Court issue not a TRO but a status ante order not to proclaim it until we resolve this case? Will the Supreme Court actually resolve the case right away and just dismiss it because the people have spoken? I mean, there's so. I don't want to blame the current COMELEC, especially the new commissioners, because they've just been really there for a month or so. But this was, as an institution, not forgivable. Disqualification case should be decided in December, so that when it goes to the Supreme Court, by March or by mid-April, a month before the elections, it's settled.
Yeah.
That's what happened in the case of Fernando Po. That's what happened in the case of Grace Po.
Yeah.
By mid-April, these things were settled. And so people voted
Hindi
with
tayo
confidence.
umabot sa election day.
Yes,
Oo.
because if umabot ka sa elections, we will have a very strange situation where under the Constitution, if the president-elect does not qualify, it's the vice president-elect that ascends to the presidency. First temporarily, but if the Supreme Court later decide, or the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, it's going to be strange because at first it will be the Supreme Court as Supreme Court. Later it will be the Presidential Electoral Tribunal when it becomes a contest. So it's lots of issues, lots of legal issues. It's not really. This is not fair to Mr. Marcos. Not fair to the people.
Yeah.
Not fair to the petitioners that they're going to decide the disqualification petitions the day after the election.
And if you look at the surveys, ang nangunguna sa VP race is Sara Duterte. But that's
so
for some...
the conspiracy theory there is that this is how the president gets what he wants, right? Because the president always wanted Sara to be the president. But that's a conspiracy theory, and that assumes the Supreme Court will cooperate, which I don't think they will.
Dean Tony, in January, I interviewed VP Leni Robredo, and I asked her if she wants BBM disqualified or DQ'd, or if she would rather that she defeats him in an election. And she said, and I quote, "Mas gusto ko na talunin ko siya sa eleksyon." That's what she
that
said.
makes sense. I mean, I think if you're a politician, that's what you should ask for. I mean, there are people who also say that if Marcos is qualified now, the second placer, presumably VP Leni, should take over. No, she shouldn't, because she wouldn't have a mandate, right? I mean, it would have been different if Marcos was disqualified with finality before the election, because then he won't be. Votes for him would be null and void. But it's very different in the circumstances that we have now.